Sabo is the fifth emperor, a very accidental fifth emperor, I should say, who has now been elevated to a level of prominence that he did not expect due to a murder he did not commit. And just as his newly bestowed title of the Flame Emperor alludes to, this fire has well and truly started, and Sabo's power, influence, and notoriety in this world now very much rivals the established four emperors. Again, I want to emphasize that Sabo himself did not plan this, and I highly doubt that he wants any of it either, as he's now in a position where the momentum of the revolution is actively threatening the influence of Dragon, the man who Sabo trusts and believes in to deliver global liberation. And Sabo's status as the Flame Emperor is very potentially undermining Dragon's efforts, as we will explore a bit later in the video. Sabo, he's an accidental emperor. Whoops, I'm an emperor now. And it's all because of a series of in-world conspiracies. This information was revealed by the director of the Naval Bureau of Investigation, Kuruma, real name Tensei, who found that as a result of the assault on the Revery, the general public now believe that Sabo is responsible for the following three events. Firstly, the murder of King Cobra of the Alabaster Kingdom. Secondly, the kidnapping of Princess Nefertari Vivi, also of the Alabaster Kingdom. And finally, the attempted murder of Saint Charles. Now, we as well-read fictional pirate connoisseurs, we know that none of what I just said is true. Sabo got a lot done at the Revery, but he's being credited with all of the wrong things, and here is why that is a pretty big deal. To us, having the murder of King Cobra attributed to you would be a pretty bad thing. And again, this is because we as readers, we know King Cobra. He was one of, if not the best kings of a world government nation, but what we need to remember is that his family name is Nefertari. And the Nefertari clan were one of the 20 founding families of the world government. So if you're a civilian living on some island with an absolute prick of a king, you're going to read that name, Nefertari, ooh, and you're going to assume that King Cobra is probably even worse than your monarch, because he is one of the progenitors of the system it is that you live under. He belongs to one of the founding families. The dude is practically a world noble, even if they didn't choose to go and live at Marijois. So Cobra's murder was met with the same level of raucous applause that I know the fan base would give if next chapter Oda announced the death of Saint Charles, which Sabo is also being blamed for attempting to make happen. We'll get to that. But firstly, we have item number the second. With all of that Nefertari prejudice in mind, the idea of Sabo kidnapping Nefertari Vivi is also seen as quite a laudable act, as in the minds of the revolutionists around the world, Sabo has essentially taken a world noble hostage to use for future bargaining power. And what that does, right, it establishes Sabo as a man of action and as a man of planning for the future. He seems very reliable, and that's why everything else that happened at the Revery got attributed to him as well. As we know, it was Sai and Leo of the Straw Hat Grand Fleet who flattened a St. Charles like a pancake, and it was St. Don Quixote Moscard that allowed them to get away with it, something that Moscard has since been executed for. The world doesn't know that. Too much internal politics, it's too complicated. All that's been reported is the attempted murder of St. Charles. And with Sabo being allegedly responsible for killing Cobra and kidnapping Vivi, Kuruma reports that the world at large believes that Sabo is responsible for the Charlos incident as well. A very busy boy causing many chaoses in a single day, which is of course very reminiscent of his brother, Mr. Monkey D. Luffy. And something very interesting about this is that there is a slight difference in dialogue between the anime and the manga. In the manga, Kuruma says that the public is convinced that Sabo was behind everything. However, in the anime, he says that people are excited to think that Sabo was behind all of these incidents. And there's a pretty damn big difference between those lines. One implying that the revolutionists have come to a logical conclusion. Sabo did a bunch of stuff. Other things also happened. Sabo did them as well. But the other implying a pretty serious raging bloodlust within the general population. The idea that they are excited to think that Sabo may have killed and tried to kill and kidnapped so many people, which is now culminated in Sabo being worshipped in a manner akin to that of a god, as the countries involved in the Eight Nation Revolution have hung his portrait in their central town gathering points, as if Sabo is some kind of supreme leader. And it's quite a terrifying following, to be honest with you, because when this sort of thing happens to Luffy, and it has actually, Hancock hung his portrait up in the Amazon Lily gathering place, but when it happens to Luffy, it's very good, because Luffy manages to appeal to that inner good and kindness within people. However, Sabo's notoriety is appealing to the inner frustration and the inner violence harbored by those living in corrupt monarchies. When people pay tribute to Luffy, they raise a mug of assorted party liquid with a bright smile on their face, but from what we've seen, when people pay tribute to Sabo, they raise their nearest nearest weapon with a gleam of angry determination. It's the sort of situation that could get very quickly out of hand, as is fitting of Sabo's Flame Emperor title. If you're not careful with a flame, then yes, it is capable of burning beyond your control. And it can be argued that that flame is already beyond Sabo's control, but being an emperor isn't always about the individual desires of said emperor. And just as with Luffy, and actually Bucky before him, Sabo is being forcibly raised into that position by those around him. And what probably doesn't help are people like me who promote and support Sabo's manifesto via our choice of undergarments. But look, the fact that roughly 2 million unique monthly viewers know exactly what kind of underwear I have is a pretty confronting breach of privacy that I have admittedly brought upon myself. But I would strongly urge you to secure your own privacy with the sponsor of this video, CyberGhost VPN. A VPN, mate, it is essential for protecting your digital privacy. Incognito mode is not enough, and it only gives you a false sense of privacy. Your ISP, your school or work's IT department, your home Wi-Fi router, and even the websites you visit still know who you are and track your every move, and Incognito does nothing to stop them. So to put a stop to this invasion, what you need is CyberGhost VPN. With over 38 million users worldwide, this is the most recommended VPN provider on the market. You just turn on CyberGhost VPN before you browse, it encrypts and reroutes 100% of your traffic through their secure servers so that no one will even know about your online activity. It's all very simple, it has a near perfect score on Trustpilot, and CyberGhost has servers in over 100 countries ready to cater to your every need. And by the way, by changing your location with CyberGhost, you can also unblock libraries of over 40 streaming platforms like Netflix, Amazon Prime, and many more. The app is available for all operating systems and can protect up to 7 devices at the same time, keeping you anonymous around the clock and allowing you to share your subscription with friends or family. And very importantly, CyberGhost VPN does not keep logs, so not even they know what you do online, which is probably for the best because you and I know what you do online, and this is not very good, is it? So if you want to keep prying eyes at bay and be anonymous online, now is the perfect time to get CyberGhost VPN. And by scanning the QR code on screen or using the link in the description, you will benefit from an 83% discount, and you'll also get 4 months for free. And since they have a 45-day money-back guarantee and access to 24/7 customer support, everything is risk-free for you. So use the link in the description to get CyberGhost VPN and start protecting your digital privacy today. But for now, it's back to you, me. However, with all of that said, does this actually make him an emperor? I think there's a lot of people out there who would immediately say, no, internet man, you're stupid. But mate, guys, just hear me out. Because first things first, the emperor system, not quite as fixed or rigid as people may think. There is no rule or natural barrier that says you can only have 4 emperors and they have to be sea emperors, not flame emperors. And in fact, historically, we've had less than 4 emperors. In One Piece novel Ace, during a discussion with Thatch, the makeup of the system prior to the 4 emperors was revealed as a 3 emperor system, with Goldie Roger, Edward Newgate, and Golden Lion Shiki being known as the rulers of the New World. And it was only after Roger turned himself in and Shiki had a bit of a tantrum that room was made for the modern 4 emperor system to emerge. And there's no confirmation of this at this time, but it's currently suspected that what we know as the 4 emperor system only took hold when Shanks became an emperor, which was 6 years ago, as Big Mom, Whitebeard, and Kaido acquired all of the most powerful territories in the New World, and what Shanks did was form a coalition out of the rejected islands, the ones that were viewed as too weak to be part of an empire. Shanks built his empire out of those. And so the theory is that Shanks made space for himself as a 4th emperor by doing a bit of cleanup. And from the very beginning, Oda was writing One Piece as a story about conflict with the emperors, and he blames arbitrarily deciding to create 7 warlords as the reason why One Piece has taken so long. But we actually have evidence that the emperor idea existed pre-One Piece as well, as in Romance Dawn version 1, the main antagonist Crescent Moon Galley was a pirate aiming to become one of the so-called Besuto Suri, which is exactly what it sounds like, the best 3, again alluding to the idea that there were 3 emperors. And within One Piece itself, we've not only gone below 3 but also above it due to that time period where Luffy was considered to be a 5th emperor. And now a lot of newer fans may not remember these times. I guess by newer fans I mean if you started reading or watching any time in the past 5 years. But when chapter 903 came out declaring Luffy as the 5th emperor, this was met with quite a bit of controversy, as at the time there were a lot of people who could not accept that Luffy had actually met the criteria of being an emperor of the sea. This was a wild time on the internet full of crazy semantic battles, all of which has long since been settled after Wano, with Luffy actually becoming one of the 4 emperors. But everything that happened back then very much applies to Sabo at the moment. Whilst in Japanese Japanese, Luffy is known as a Yonko today. Back in chapter 903, his Japanese title was the Daigoko, which does mean 5th Emperor, but it's a piece of linguistic nuance that we miss out on in English. And what it does is indicate that Luffy is not a member of the original group, the Yonko, but he is something that exists adjacent to them, which is something that would go on to be confirmed in a magazine article which clarified that Luffy could more accurately be referred to as the man who stands beside the 4 emperors. And Sabo now has his own unique distinction as well, just as Luffy did. Sabo is called the Flame Emperor in English, sounds very similar, but in Japanese his title is Ente, which means the same thing, but again it offers up Sabo in a position separate from the system that we would refer to as the Yonko. And here's why I think that may be the case. Firstly, the title of Flame Emperor is a pretty multifaceted one. At first you'd think that it's just an obvious reference to Sabo's devil fruit abilities. He has a fire logia, the dude's fire, and therefore Flame Emperor sounds nice. But it also takes on a more metaphorical meaning, because the 2 big elemental motifs within the Revolutionary Army as a whole are wind and flame, and together wind fanning the flame. So Sabo being labeled as the Flame Emperor is alluding to him being the spark of the revolution, which he was. He was the one who declared the war, and he's also the one who is deemed responsible for all the conspiracy theories floating around in world. And overall, he is now the single greatest driving force for revolutionary activity all over the world. He is a literal and metaphorical flame burning rather bright. But also, another thing in this could just be me, but I believe that Sabo is labeled as the Flame Emperor as a direct contrast to Luffy. In chapter 1054, when the unnamed revolutionary dude is speaking through the megaphone, he says, "In the world of pirates, the Flame Emperor's brother has upended the old order. The times are indeed changing," which is directly referring to Luffy and claiming that this fight for the world is taking place on 2 fronts. You've got Sabo challenging the old order of the government, and you've got Luffy challenging the old established order of piracy, which together are the reason why the world is the way it is. And so if we're looking to perfectly contrast those 2 battlefields, if Luffy is an emperor of the sea, and the sea is like a lot of water and stuff, then Sabo is the emperor of the flame, the opposing element of water, and together these 2 brothers are upending the world order. And part of challenging that world order may be installing an emperor from an unexpected background with unexpected qualifications. Because, I don't know, maybe Sabo doesn't meet the criteria to become an emperor as we know it, but the whole point is that we're trying to escape those rules that we know and build a new world with new rules. So as for the established criteria of being an emperor, I don't know if it's necessarily that important. It's more about the theory of how Shanks became an emperor by how you carve space for yourself. And to me, Sabo has done that quite accidentally effectively, with a current coalition coming from these newly freed world government nations. The countries that revolted during the 8-Nation Revolution are not affiliated with any emperor, nor are they affiliated with the world government, and what's happened is that we've started to create a whole new empire claiming Sabo as its leader, one which only has the potential to greatly expand as any number of the remaining 170 plus world government nations find themselves slipping into revolution. But also, when discussing the idea of Sabo becoming an emperor, I feel like a fairly easy wall to run into is the idea that, mate, surely only pirates can become an emperor. And to that I say, I don't know about that. Because yes, the 4 emperors have been referred to as the 4 strongest and most influential pirates specifically, but that's because they all happen to be pirates, not because it's necessary as a prerequisite. And even then, if anything, the 4 emperors have transcended piracy as we know it. And you can tell that because of how they all refer to themselves. Oda makes some very interesting deliberate choices here, with Big Mom calling herself the Queen of Totterland, whilst Kaido is the Governor General of the Beast Pirates, and Blackbeard has the audacity to label himself as the Admiral of his fleet, which is also what Golden Lion Shiki called himself during his reign, and Whitebeard, of course, was lovingly labeled as Pops. Meanwhile, current Emperor Buggy is referred to as the Chairman. All of these emperors no longer take on the mantle of Captain, they give themselves a new title. And in fact, the only 2 known emperors who still refer to themselves as pirate captains are Luffy and Roger, who also happen to be the 2 most unconventional conventional emperors because they're the most pure of pirates. And if anything, the very concept of being an emperor is antithetical to piracy, because being an emperor, having followers and territory and all that, it becomes very logistically restrictive. You're not free at all, and from now until the day you die or get overthrown, life is a constant chess battle to maintain the empire you've built. And so there are definitely more natural pipelines of life to plonk a person who would excel in a position like this, a revolutionary ideology being one of them. Their aim is to change the world, and they are very actively invested in liberating, maintaining, and building individual territories. But even if we went with a more classical interpretation of an emperor, let's examine the words that led to Luffy being labeled as an emperor. But even more than the imminent meeting of world leaders, the people of the world buzzed with the news of young pirate Straw Hat Luffy, who dared to confront Big Mom, the Emperor of the Sea whose supremacy had gone unchallenged for decades. The newspaper stated that, according to reliable sources, Straw Hat Luffy already had 7 powerful crews under his sway, combining the authority of a captain with over 5,000 followers, the notoriety with both Ace and the number 2 of the revolutionary Sabo, the extreme charisma and leadership to assume impromptu command over the formidable trio of the evil Germa 66, the Sun Pirates, and the Fire Tank Pirates, the calculated strategic brilliance to execute the destruction of the Queen's castle, and the strength to defeat her officers worth 800 million and 1 billion berries. The result of this incident was clear to all. Straw Hat Luffy was victorious, and it was the arrival of the 5th Emperor of the Sea. So a couple of things here. The first is that almost everything that's said by the narrator here about Luffy, Sabo has an equivalent of. In fact, you could replace Luffy's name with Sabo and also a couple of other nouns, and it would still sound quite convincing. Luffy confronted Big Mom, an Emperor of the Sea, a power that had gone unchallenged for decades, while Sabo had confronted the world government, a power that had gone unchallenged for centuries, and he came out of it victorious. Luffy managed to unite 7 powerful pirate crews as his grand fleet, and Sabo has done something similar, as after the erasure of Lelucia, Sabo now has exactly 7 countries united behind him from the 8-Nation Revolution. Meanwhile, it was Luffy's strategic brilliance that was said to cause the destruction of Big Mom's castle, a building shaped like food, and it was said to be Sabo's strategic brilliance that caused the destruction of the world nobles' buildings containing actual food and leading to their famine, as well as causing the destruction of their fancy hoof symbol. In addition, Luffy took on 2 officers of Big Mom pirates, and Sabo took on 2 marine admirals, etc. It doesn't matter if it's actually true. What matters is that that is what's being reported. And really, it's as if Sabo read the narrator's speech and used it as a step-by-step guide. And so I would imagine that Sabo's next bounty is very much going to reflect that. Because another wall I predict is the inevitable, but man, on the internet, Sabo only has a bounty of 602 million berries. That is nowhere near enough to be considered an emperor, and I do agree with that. Bounties are not power scaling, but they do represent threat levels. And no emperor is threatening at only 602 million berries. But after everything that Sabo has done, and more importantly, everything that he's been falsely accused of doing, Sabo currently has a new bounty out in the world that is currently unknown. And I would be shocked if his new bounty wasn't close to that 3 billion berry range. Not because he's necessarily worth that, but because of all of the things that have been attributed to him. And especially because the 5 elders even know a little secret that Sabo has seen Imu, and is therefore even more of a threat to the world government than all of the false accusations make him out to be. And what gives me the most confidence in terms of Entree's grand bounty pour Le Sabo is that it's reported that he is now so popular that he may have even more influence than Monkey D. Dragon, who I will remind everyone is considered to be the world's worst criminal and likely has the highest bounty of any living character in the series. So if Sabo exceeds Dragon's threat level, then we are looking at potentially unfathomably big numbers. Not that numbers alone make an emperor, no matter how big they be, as shown probably by Dragon, but more tangibly by Mihawk, whose current bounty is higher than 2 of the current 4 emperors. And there's also no one person, one factor, or one body that decides whether or not someone is an emperor. I often see the misconception online that the world government are the ones responsible for officially crowning a pirate as an emperor, but I think this is from people getting a bit confused with the warlord system, because it would very much not be in the world government's best interest to hype up their enemies. Warlord titles are granted because theoretically the world government controls warlords, but becoming an emperor is more to do with global consensus and natural public impression. But on that note, if there was one person who could theoretically crown an emperor, then that person would be Big News Morgans, because if he publishes a big newspaper claiming that someone is now an emperor, then that is going to be taken quite seriously by the rest of the world, provided that that person has the CV of notoriety that we've already explored. So what I think this comes down to is if Morgans has published the Flame Emperor title, then I think this is as good as done. And we have no hard confirmation that he did, but when Sabo returned to Momoira Island, Emporio Ivankov calls him Flame Emperor Boy, a name that he must have heard from somewhere, and given that he wasn't present at any of the nations adopting that title, it's likely that he read it in the World Economic Journal, and if so, then this world has already given birth to another 5th Emperor. And thank you so much again to CyberGhostVPN for sponsoring this video. Definitely click the link in the description to get that 83% discount, 4 months for free, and start protecting your surprisingly exposed digital privacy today.